love that song, Jim. It's almost as long as Jim and I have worked together. He occasionally springs that right before the sermon because he knows I'm all choked up by the time I get up here. It comes out of my passion for Revelation chapter 4, where John gets a chance to peek through the door into heaven. Such a powerful scene. And they gather around the throne and cast their crowns before him, and they say, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty." And I can't do any more or I'll be crying. So we're going to stop right there and have an invitation song. And we're going to start a series this morning on the Trinity. I know that word's not even in the Bible. If you have a problem with the word, email me with the right word to use, and I will. I'll change the title page. This came out of a question regarding prayer several weeks ago, in which the question was asked, so when we're talking to God, when we're praying, are we talking to God the Father? Is it okay for us to talk to the Son, to Jesus, to, what seems kind of confusing? And it dawned on me that it probably is about high time that we just kind of take a dive into the biblical concept of the Trinity. God is a triune being, and the danger here is that this becomes an intellectual exercise. And I don't want this to be about making you smarter people, because you're not saved by your intellect. And the majority of us who understood that statement are saying a hearty amen, right? If we were saved by our intellect, I'd be sunk already. So this isn't an intellectual exercise. I'm not trying to make you smarter. My goal is to help you understand who the main character in the biblical narrative really is. And we were talking this morning in my class with the young adults. They're too young to be young adults, but too old to be youngsters, so I don't know what to call them. But they're brilliant anyway. And we were talking about the theme of the Bible and kind of the plot. I asked them to tell me the plots behind the stories that they enjoyed reading, and it's so much fun to ask people, tell me about your favorite book or tell me about your favorite movie, because people just light up. They're excited to tell that story that makes them excited or evokes emotion in them, and so. The plot of the biblical narrative is really pretty simple. The main character is not Abraham, it's not Jesus really, though some might argue with me. But the main character of the biblical narrative is the protagonist, the hero of the story, is this character who wears a lot of different names, but his name in the Old Testament is Yahweh. And The Bible never stops to make a case for the fact that there really is a Yahweh, doesn't stop to give evidence for Yahweh's existence. It just opens with these words. In the beginning, God, Yahweh, created. There you go. You guys are going to have to work with me. This is one you all know. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God hovered over the surface of the deep. And out of that chaos comes this concerto, this magnificent creation that you see around you. And it's a result of the creative mind of Yahweh, His Spirit, and His ability to reach into chaos and create order, which is what He's doing in your life, just like He's doing in mine. Thank Yahweh for that. If you have any order to your life. And then when we get to the Gospel of John especially, John says, oh, and by the way, there was another character involved in that whole creative process, and we'll just call him Logos. And this Logos, in the beginning was the Logos, the Word. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, and all things came to being through Him and apart from Him. So John wants to make sure you understand, all things came into being through Him, and apart from Him, what? Nothing came into being that has come into being. So if it exists, Logos was responsible for its existence. And then, of course, the crescendo of that line of thought in verse 14 is the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Actually, it says the Word became flesh and tabernacled. That is, I could do 5 sermons just on that concept. The idea that it's not, I used to say, and most of you that have heard me preach through the years know that, in fact, I was having a study with my son last week, and I referenced that verse, and he said, I know, Jesus parked his double wide in our trailer park. And I used to say that. But the truth of the matter is that is such a woefully inadequate translation. It's not just that Jesus pitched his tent in our neighborhood. It's that he becomes what the Old Testament tabernacle was. He becomes this meeting place where God and humanity can be one in a clean space. So this character, this Yahweh personality, is the hero of the entire biblical narrative, and he is the wronged party. In a literary from a literary point of view, all good literature, and the Bible is good literature, and you ask me and I'll tell you, it's exciting and it's so deep and so many layers. But in good literature, there's always a conflict, and the conflict revolves around this: that Yahweh creates this perfect world. In fact, as He creates it in phases, and He steps back after each phase, and what does He say? He looks at it and He says, "Now that's good, right?" That's good stuff, as I'm constantly being made fun of for saying. So, God steps back, looks at it, and says, "That's good stuff." Anybody in here ever tried your hand at art and fumbled around and messed stuff up, and then finally, you got it, and you're kind of feeling like, wow, this might be about to work, and then you step back and look at it and you think, wow, that's good. Well, God being that creative, Yahweh being that creative character, creates this perfect world, and after each phase he steps back and looks at it and says, well, that's good. Then after he creates humanity, he steps back and he says, that's really good. Okay? So God creates this perfect world, invites humanity in to be a co-ruler in this new kingdom. And humanity says, after a period of time, I have no idea how long, it could have been 10 years, it could have been 10 million years, the Bible doesn't say, but I believe that the biblical narrative in the Genesis account is accurate. I believe that it happened the way Genesis says it happened. And I believe that at some point humanity says, instead of getting our truth from God, we're just going to reach out and grab a hold of an external source of truth, and we're going to chase moral and scientific truth off out of the garden, and so God exiles them. And humanity begins to, as we were talking about in our Bible class this morning, begins to toxify their environment with the way we treat one another and the way we treat God, and things just are a mess. And you look at what we have done with the place in 2022, it's, to quote Pumbaa, I believe, in Lion King, talk about your fixer-upper. We've reached that point where it's just, it's a mess. And God is the one who is the wronged party. And so what we're going to do is try to become a little clearer in the way we think about Jehovah. And I've got a lot of ground to cover, and I'm not even through with the intro. Yikes. I got up there at Cricket at a preacher's conference many years ago. Early in my ministry, I was at a preacher's conference, and there were a bunch of the big heavy hitter kind of guys that were on the podium, and they were preaching about God and all this good stuff, and it was good. Not being lighthearted about it, but I was after lunch, especially. I was sitting there and kind of fighting sleep. I know you guys don't have that problem, but I was really kind of struggling to stay awake, and I noticed that there was a little cricket, and it kept bouncing up against the wall and then falling down, and bouncing up against the wall and falling down, and I became fixated on this cricket. And preacher after preacher got up behind the pulpit, and the cricket still just kept doing its thing. I'm not sure what it was trying to accomplish, but at some point I thought, we're talking about stuff that we really don't have any frame of reference to understand. I mean, when you start talking about Jehovah, about a God who created time, who lives above it, who's not impacted by it. Anybody in here been impacted by time this morning at all? Ask my wife, who was trying to get me to relax a little bit on my way to church because I was just almost late, as I often am. It would be like trying to explain the things that we were talking about in that preacher's conference to the cricket, who has no frame of reference whatsoever. And one of the things that I want to do in setting the stage for this discussion is I need to make it very plain that God unveils the truth about himself and the truth about the universe around you in tiny little increments. Okay? The frustration, especially, in fact, I know of people who've really struggled with their faith when they delved deep into the Old Testament, because it seems like the Old Testament writers were very clueless about who God is and about what's really going on. And there's a reason why they seem like they're clueless. It's because they were clueless. That God only unveiled little bits and pieces to them. And if you don't believe that, I mean, and I don't have time to unpack it, but read 1 Peter chapter 1 and chapter 2 and look at, you know, this faith and the way it's described and how Peter says, you know, basically it was just unveiled in little bits and pieces. So when we start looking at Jehovah in the Old Testament, there's going to be a frustration. Well, the truth of the matter is, when we get to the New Testament, there's still going to be a lot of frustration because there are some aspects about Jehovah that are not going to be understandable by human beings. And Jesus just makes this statement, didn't, in fact, in John chapter 16, verse 12. That whole section, I'm suspecting that a lot of what we're going to do in this discussion on the Trinity is going to come out of John chapter 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. Because it's just cram-packed full of all sorts of good stuff about that. But in John chapter 16, verse 12, Jesus says this to his disciples. So these guys, 11 of them, the 12th has gone out and hanged himself, but these 11 guys have been hanging around with Jesus for 3 years. And let me rephrase that. They've been hanging around with Yahweh in human skin for 3 years. And Jesus says in John 16, John Dennis's paraphrase, I have so much I want to tell you, but you're just not ready to receive it. What? Well, we're ready. Just lay it on us. Well, see, therein lies the problem with Revelation in general, is that God knows that human beings are not able to embrace this idea or these ideas in one big chunk. So he unveils it very slowly and in a lot of different ways. All right. We don't like unsolved mysteries. We pride ourselves in our intellect, which is an artifact, by the way, of the calamity that happened in the Garden of Eden. That's what happened in the Garden of Eden. Is man said, "My intellect is plenty good enough. I don't need God involved in the equation." And we left the garden. We humans left the garden in search of moral and scientific truth that we could define on our own terms. And so we did that, autonomous human intellect, and now we have a mess on our hands as a result of that. So here we go. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. The first thing I want to tell you about Jehovah, about Yahweh, is this Shema, or Shema, that the Israelites would quote on so many occasions. They would quote it on their way to worship, and they would quote it during worship. And it goes like this. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh our God, Yahweh is what? What? Okay. Well, I thought we were talking about the Trinity. Well, we are. So here's the question. How can God be three and then also be one? And I have heard so many illustrations on this. I saw a guy do a deal some time ago about, a dollar bill is money, and a $5 bill is money, and a $20 bill is money, but they're all money. But no, that's not what we're talking about. We're not. A dollar bill is separate and distinct from a $5 bill, and a $5 bill is separate and distinct from a $20 bill. And there's a lot of $20 bills. In fact, some of you have 2 or 3 $20 bills in your pocket. At least those who don't have kids that are living at home. is God three or is God one? And how do we understand that? And I really struggled with what to do with this, and I don't know, this may fall flat on its face, but I'm going to give it a try. I would like to do a better job on this. I just threw together a real quick animation that I want to show you. Actually, 4 animations. Anybody in here ever read Edwin Abbott's Flatland? Does that ring a bell? And by the way, I was introduced to this by John Clayton many years ago. John Clayton used it. John Clayton, who was once an atheist and who managed to accidentally become a disciple of Jesus, which is such a fantastic story. But he, in his discussions on does God exist, he used this this book by Abbott. It's a mini novel, and it really isn't about Christianity or religion. It's about mathematics and about geometry. But for the time being, I want you to bear with me. And the story of this goes like this: that there's this world in which all of the characters that live in the world only live in 2 dimensions. Okay, so they've got a width and they've got a length, but they have no height. Okay, so they're flat. Yeah. Thus, the name of the book is Flatland. Okay, so in this world, this flat little world, you've got squares and you've got circles, and they run around doing flat person things and interacting with each other. I know it's really a simple, cheesy little animation. But the narrative of the story is that one day a 3-dimensional being visits Flatland and begins to interact with the little 2-dimensional guy. And I'm going to butcher this, but I mean basically, hey little 2-dimensional guy, how are you doing? I'm a 3-dimensional guy. And the flat guy says, there is no 3 dimensions. And the 3-dimensional guy says, oh yeah, sure there are. And so he tries to explain what the 3rd dimension would look like, right? And the little 2-dimensional guy can't understand it. So the 3-dimensional guy decides to pass through the 2-dimensional guy's little world. Okay? And again, really cheesy graphics. If you were looking for graphics, Black Hills Church is probably not it. But here's what he sees. Here's what the little 2-dimensional guy sees as the apple passes through his plane. I don't think it was an apple, by the way, in the story. But these are the 2 points of the bottom of the apple, and from his perspective, right here, it looks like there are 2 characters. Now, I love this. Is there 1 character, or is there 2 characters in the little flat guy's world? Well, it looks like there's 2 characters. Is there just 1 character? Or 2 characters? Well, the apple's just 1. He just has the appearance of a second. So I don't think I have time to start this slide, but here's where we're going to go with this next week. And I want to introduce you to a couple of passages of Scripture. Maybe you guys be thinking about them and meditating on them. And so in Genesis chapter 1, the creation narrative that we've been talking about. Oh, by the way, my conclusion to the flat man thing is that the 3-dimensional guy takes the 2-dimensional guy into the 3rd dimension in the story. And I'll confess, I have never read it. I just watched a couple of videos that kind of gave me the gist of this story. But The three-dimensional guy takes the two-dimensional guy into the third dimension, and he's like, how cool is this? And then the two-dimensional guy says to the three-dimensional guy, I want you to take me to the fourth dimension. And I love this. The three-dimensional guy says, well, there is no fourth dimension. Huh. See how we are? We little three-dimensional guys running around in our little three-dimensional world. And you've got this multi-dimensional God who's who, by the way, had an intimate relationship with our great-great-great-great-great-grandparents-ish. He had this multi-dimensional Yahweh had this intimate relationship where he was known and knew these other, at the time, I think, multi-dimensional people. And so there's this intimate relationship, and then as the relationship is fragmented by humans' arrogance and sin, we've lost an understanding of what it means to be multidimensional. So, when people start talking about Jehovah being three and being one, our little brains go, right? We just, I don't know what that means. So I'm going to start you along that path, and then next week we're going to dive into this. I want to put two verses out there for you. The first one, verse 26 of Genesis chapter 1. I want you to jump over there. I'm going to do it quick. But I want to do this, get it started, and then... so I've already blown the idea that this is going to be 5 segments. But sorry. At least going to be 6. So then verse 26, Genesis chapter 1, then God said, no, watch this. Let us. Is there any place else in the entire Bible where the pronoun for God is plural? Now, I started to say there is no other place in the entire Bible where the pronoun for God is plural, but I'm not sure that that's true. But I can tell you that it's extremely rare. And I can also tell you that it is extremely poor grammar in this particular sentence. And the Bible never uses poor grammar, unless it's trying to make a point. For instance, when Jesus in John chapter 8 says, before Abraham was, I am, that is poor grammar. But Jesus couldn't use proper grammar and get across the idea he wanted to get across. So in this case, you've got a plural verb, or a plural pronoun and a singular verb. Really important. It doesn't translate into our English very well, but that idea that there's multiple characters, but they're all doing something in concert. And he says, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky. So the point that we're going to do, that we're going to make next week, I'm going to ask you the question, do you ever have discussions with yourself? Do you? Do you? Oh, you come on, you can admit it. I was in a bookstore several years ago at Borders bookstore looking for a book. I suppose that went without saying, but I was in Borders bookstore, and a guy about where the baptistry is was standing there, and he was having a conversation. I mean, a full-out conversation with himself and answering himself, and he's having a little argument, and I was afraid a fight was going to break out and didn't know who's going to win, and it was just like bizarre. Except it really isn't, because that kind of thing goes on in my little head all the time. And interestingly enough, now I want you to watch this. So this week I want you to pay attention to the voices. The conversations going on inside your head. So one voice is going to be focused, I guarantee it, 100%, money back, guarantee. One voice is going to be focused on the right here, right now, immediate gratification, some desire. That's going to say, I want that, or I want to feel this, or I want to whatever. So one voice is going to be focused on the here and on the now, and it's going to be very loud. And then the other voice, probably not quite as loud, is going to be focused on down the road. It's going to be focused on the future, and it's going to say, yeah, but that doesn't work out very well when we do that. Notice the pronoun I'm using. We. What is it? Is it one guy or is it two guys having a conversation? I'm asking. Well, it's apparently, yeah, John's got some mental problems, right? Am I the only one in here who has that happen? Where, you know, the physical guy says, I want this, and the spiritual guy, focused on eternity actually, is saying, yeah, but that doesn't, that's not good, right? So that conversation going on. Now the bizarre thing about this is that there's a third voice in there. The third voice that comes into the discussion and becomes the arbitrator, or that becomes the referee, and says, yeah, shut up, spirit, we're going to do this. Or, shut up, physical man, we're going to do this. So you and I aren't at all, well, maybe we are a little, but we're not completely freaked out by the idea that we are three characters in one. Right? So, I'm just going to put 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 23. I want you to turn over with me, and I'm going to end with this because I'm out of time. 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 23. And this really, Paul didn't intend this to be a treatise on the triune God. It's just a blessing that he's praying for people in the church in Thessalonica. And he says in verse 23, now watch this, this is so beautiful. May God himself, the God of peace, sanctify you through and through. What do you mean by through and through? Well, Paul says, glad you asked. May your whole spirit, soul, and body be kept blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. Well, what a beautiful blessing. But what Paul's doing there is he's subtly saying, you are a triune being. You are a Trinity as well. So when Genesis says, let us, God says, let us make man in our image, one of the components of our God-imageness is the fact that we are triune in the same way that he is triune. Is God one? Yes. Is he three? Yes. And yet, the power of our Yahweh is that he has, well, first of all, he has complete concert between the three. And in fact, when we get to John 17 and some of those passages, John 17 in particular, there's these statements that Jesus makes, and they're really strange statements. I mean, if you really look at them in the context. He makes these statements about what it was like before the beginning of the world between Jesus and God. And I love this. It is so magnificent. And then, of course, Jesus is going to invite you and me to come be a part of that for eternity. Anybody game for buying into that deal? Okay. Well, I got to quit because I'm out of time.